Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday evening webinar series. This evening we have a very interesting series of presentations organized by our trainees, and I'm very grateful to David Brinkman, who's the chair of the surgical trainees group, for him organizing such an interesting program. We have over 200 people signed up to join in, and I'm sure if you're looking at the list of people in the meeting, it'll rapidly grow over the next couple of minutes. And those of you who would like to ask questions or to engage in the discussion, please use the chat function, which is much easier than raising your hand and trying to come in on voice. So if you put your question or your point in the chat function, then either David or myself will put it to our two speakers. In that regard, I'd be grateful if all could turn off their videos and your microphones so that we can focus on the presentations, and that makes it easier for everyone. I'm not going to do the introductions because David is going to kindly do that for us, and I'll come back towards the end with some comments to sum it all up. So David, thank you for organizing it, and thank you to our speakers.
Thank you, Professor O'Connell, and thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome everyone to tonight's Wednesday webinar. I'm David Brinkman. I'm the current Irish Surgical Training Group President. We're a group of Irish trainees that represent Irish trainees to the college and in various other platforms. And we've put together an interesting webinar for you tonight on modern apprenticeships and how to go from junior to senior in an era that doesn't tolerate mistakes. First up, we have Cathal Berry from the Irish Defence Forces giving an Army perspective, and then Captain Carl O'Neill of Aer Lingus will give us an airline perspective. So to start off, Cathal, just by way of introduction, was second in command of the Army Ranger Wing for 6 years and was an Army Ranger for decades, with experience in training in high-stakes environments. He's been deployed on multiple high-tension missions, and to add strings to his bow and make us all feel bad, he's also completed a degree in medicine in RCSI in 2014, and he is a current TD for his constituency of Kildare South. So he'll be speaking on training in the Army, and I'm just going to share your slides there now, Cathal. Cathal, you should be able to see that there now.
We can see it perfectly, David. Yeah, thanks very much. I'm happy to start whenever you're good to go, Dave.
Yeah, ready when you are, Cathal.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for the very kind invitation. Very, very glad to be here. Thanks as well for the overly generous introduction, David. Yeah, thoroughly undeserved, but appreciated nonetheless. So look, I've just been asked to speak with you for about 15 minutes or so this evening, and just to chat to you really about how militaries in general and how the Irish Defence Forces specifically, how they go about their business, and crucially, how they minimize mistakes, or at least attempt to minimize mistakes, and thereby maximizing performance. So that's really the general thrust of what we're about. I suppose at first glance, you'd be forgiven for thinking that really military and medicine, surgery, they don't have a whole lot in common. So that's why we put up the first slide there. And if you look at the first photograph, the top left photograph, that just shows you some of the techniques that the military use. So that's what's called fast roping out of a helicopter. So if the helicopter can't land, if there's trees or if there's buildings in the way, they just throw out a rope and the troops just basically slide down the rope. So there's no safeties. They're not attached to anything per se. They just grip the rope with their hands and their feet and they slide down about 50 feet. So that just tells you that, you know, military and surgery have a lot in common, because I suppose the three things they have in common, it's a high stakes environment. There's very low margin for error. And thirdly, then, if things go wrong, they can go catastrophically wrong. So that's just the first photograph there. It's called fast roping. The second photograph there, so second on the left in the top rank, you can see our Air Corps pilots. They basically do a lot of high-speed, low-level flying, a lot of aerobatics, and you can see there's 3 aircraft in the one photograph there. So they do a lot of formation flying. So again, precision is really important from an Air Corps perspective as well, because obviously one false move and you're going to have a major problem on your hands from that perspective. The third photograph on the top right there, you can see our Naval Service dive team. They do a lot of great work militarily, but from a public perspective, their big job really is, unfortunately and tragically, it's when a trawler goes down, they have to dive down up to about 40 meters and pull bodies out of cabs of trawlers and bring them up to the surface and hand them over to the grieving relatives on the surface, basically just to assuage some of the sorrow from that perspective. And the top right hand photograph, that's our counter-terrorism team, basically. They're on standby 24/7. They're our anti-hijack outfit for the country. They basically practice regularly anti-hijack drills on planes, trains, automobiles, ferries, buildings, gas rigs, and everything. So you can imagine if there was a hijack scenario in Dublin Airport tonight, and if negotiations fail, and if an assault had to be ordered by the Taoiseach, you can imagine being one of those 30 people going in to assault the aircraft. So the eyes of the world would really be on you, because you'd be looking at multiple nationalities represented on the aircraft. So bottom left-hand corner, this profession probably has most to do with surgery. It's our bomb disposal team. We have about 30 specialists. They all have master's degrees in electronics and physics and all that good stuff, but it has a lot to do with surgery, because you really have to use your head and your hands at all times, basically. You can see they're wearing a suit of armor there. Unfortunately, the suit of armor doesn't really protect the individual. If a bomb goes off, it just keeps your body together, basically, for the post-mortem, unfortunately. So basically, it's a really important role, and it's important that everything goes right. And if you fail, not only will you probably fail on live TV and kill yourself, but you'll probably take a whole block of buildings and property and some people with you as well. So their job, basically, while everyone else is running away from a bomb or an explosive device, these guys and these girls, their job is to walk very, very slowly and deliberately towards the device and dismantle it with their bare hands. And I'm not sure if you can see specifically yourself, but you can see their fingers are completely exposed, like a surgeon's, with the exception of gloves. And their job basically is to dismantle the bomb before it goes off. So high stakes. And what a lot of people don't realize is there's at least a viable device found in Ireland every week and diffused and dismantled by these people every single week, which is unheard of across the European Union. And that's not including the hoaxes or the false alarms. There's a viable device on average every week, and it's diffused with very little fuss by these people. The second last photograph there is something you may not be aware of, but this is just tactical training in the Defence Forces and the Irish Defence Forces, and it's done pretty much exclusively with live fire, live ammunition. Most armies in the world only train with blank ammunition, and the Irish Army does commence with blank ammunition for sure, but their troops and their trainees rapidly progress to live fire. So these troops are doing tactical training with live ammunition, with live grenades, with live rockets. And what we find is that we try to simulate a wartime scenario so that they're very, very comfortable. And this is the key point, that they're very, very comfortable in a live fire scenario. And it's not news to them when it does kick off. And the last photograph then, the bottom right hand side, that's just some of our peacekeeping troops over in Chad in 2008. And we would basically, I suppose, Defence Forces wise, we'd be regarded as having some of the best peacekeepers in the world. And there's a reason for that, because our training is so good and our training is so tough, and because we place a lot of emphasis on live fire. So when we do send our troops abroad, They're not particularly jumpy. They don't get easily spooked, that they know that they've been down the hard road and they've been trained really, really hard. And that's why they can produce the goods when things kick off overseas. An interesting point is the Defence Forces really have been involved in peacekeeping for about 70 years, since the 1950s, and we've lost over 80 people overseas. But since 2004, there's been no fatalities, none at all. So for the last 17 years, we've had absolutely no fatalities overseas, even though the robustness and the seriousness profile of the missions have increased significantly. So we kind of did a few things back in around 2004 that has paid significant dividends in relation to our performance as an organisation, but also as a force protection for our people as well. So that's pretty much it. In summary, I think surgery and military have a huge amount in common. As we said, it's really about thinking correctly under pressure. It's really about good and quality decision making when the stress level is really, really high. And so we know what the output is required. And the key question is, how in the military or how in the Defence Forces do we get our people to that point where they can really produce the goods in a high stress situation, very, very similarly to a surgical theatre. So if you could flick on one side there, please, David.
I will in 1 second, Cathal. I just got a text just wondering if someone could let all of the people in from the Microsoft Teams room. Is that something that you could have a quick look at if you're there, Kieran? There seems to be a lot of people waiting to get in.
We'll double check now in the background for you, okay?
Thank you very much, Samantha.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you, Cathal. I'll just pop back over to that presentation now.
Will I just keep going, so David, or will I fix it?
I'm
totally easy.
What do you think, Samantha? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
I'll hold up for 2 minutes, maybe. It's probably a good...
Yeah, just hang on for 2 minutes. I think it's people who don't have RCSI email addresses maybe that are...
yeah, just let us have a look into this for 2 minutes, if you would, please. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Samantha.
So while we're pausing, Cathal, could you just tell us what measures were done in 2004? What was the basic strategy that improved the safety for our soldiers overseas?
Yeah, a great question. One, a number of them really. There was a lot more investment in the Defence Force in around 2004. There was new armoured vehicles purchased, better body armour, better helmets, but also a more professionalised training structure. So the military just got better at what they were doing. So even though the missions got more serious, and there's still plenty of firefights overseas, so we've taken a few casualties, but because our medical training has improved as well, those casualties haven't become fatalities. So a lot of our vehicles, for instance, they drove over landmines, and a wheel might be blown off a vehicle. But the troops inside were safe because of the upgrading of the armour. So we weren't driving around pretty much in soft-skinned vehicles like a Nissan Patrol anymore. It was really more up-end, MOAG, Piranha type armoured personnel carriers. So there was a much greater emphasis on force protection and moving in large numbers rather than moving in small packets of 4 or 5 people.
And what about the very rapid evacuation of casualties? Has that strategy improved?
The strategy hasn't really, well, I suppose the strategy is there, but the assets aren't. And I'm actually going to have a conversation with the Taoiseach tomorrow at Leaders' Questions inside the Convention Centre about it, actually. We really do need a dedicated medevac, strategic medevac aircraft, and it should be on standby in Ireland to put our people back, whether they be troops or diplomats or humanitarian NGOs. What's really improved on the ground at the point of injury is that a lot of our pre-hospital practitioners now are at paramedic and advanced paramedic level, which has made a big difference. So they moved from EMT grade up towards paramedic and advanced paramedic, and that certainly helped. Don't get me wrong, the military medicine side still has a lot of work to do, and we're still caught in the Stone Age, but at least there's been some improvements, but certainly plenty more to do.
But we don't have really, now it probably reflects the size of our forces and the commitments, but we don't really have military medicine as a specialty as they do in other countries.
Yeah, we actually do, believe it or not. So it came in about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's kind of a dual qualification now that you can do a military medicine scheme, which is a 5-year scheme. And the first 4 years gives you a GP qualification. And then the last year, the 5th year, gives you the military medicine qualification. So you end up being a specialist in both GP and a specialist in military medicine as well.
Good. Excellent. David, are we ready to go back? Because I don't see that many people have come in.
Sorry, it's Pauline here, and we're just working on that at the moment. We're just sending out another link to some. A lot of people can't get in for some reason, so I'd say another 2 or 3 minutes, and we will be there. Okay. Absolutely. Because one of the interesting things that I've had the opportunity of being in the QE in Birmingham, the new Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, and they have a whole military wing there. And that they can have injured soldiers back from Afghanistan in about 16 hours.
Absolutely, and that's the way to go. We just don't have the critical mass for it. But there's much better things we could be doing, even at a small level. Like, for instance, the Army Nursing Service. We actually do have an Army Nursing Service. There used to be about 100 of them there about 30 years ago. Now they're down to about 4 or 5. So that needs to be certainly be pardoned upon. We need more paramedics, more advanced paramedics, and more doctors as well. Just so when people are injured, and that's the key point. You find it hard to stop them becoming casualties, but if they become casualties, it's very important that they don't become fatalities, and all the avoidable deaths are avoided. That's the main focus.
Ronan, you need to unmute.
St. Brickens, is that functioning now as a recuperation unit or as a general practice?
Yeah, all great questions as well, Ronan. You're talking my language. Unfortunately, Brickens has been wound down significantly over the last 10 years. And in fact, it would have been a great isolation hospital for COVID where it wasn't used. The last X-ray machine was taken out about 2 years ago, just on the eve of the pandemic kicking off, of course, and it's going to be sold basically, and well, won't even say sold, probably handed over to the Land Development Agency in a few years' time. Or Devaney Gardens is just next door to it. So there is talk of a brand new medical facility being built and co-located in Baldonnel Air Base. So that's the plan in theory, but what happens in the military, nowhere to go. That place that guess it's up to me to keep the pressure on the government to make sure that an alternative facility is provided before Brickens is fully and finally wound down. It's sad to see it go, actually. It was well needed.
I mean, there would be a persuasive argument for some facility to be co-located with the new National Trauma Centre.
Absolutely, and it'd be an ideal step-down facility for that, and we've made those cases, but again, logic and reason don't seem to get through to the various layers of civil service management, unfortunately.
I remember George Fennell, who was an ENT colleague of mine, long past, a great man, used to spend a lot of time in Brickens, working there. I don't know if you're probably too young. But I remember George often would spend time in Brickens doing ENT, but I think he did a bit of small little surgical procedures there.
Yeah, like it's a fantastic, it's just between James's and the Matter, it's ideal.
Yeah, exactly. I was very interested to hear about a viable device found every week in Ireland. My goodness.
Yeah, it's all
shocking, isn't it, Ronan?
Well, I suppose there's a number of reasons why people don't hear about it. Well, first of all, it's not something you want to advertise. If something goes off in Grand Canal Dock, for instance, the tech companies will kind of get a bit concerned. But also, most of the bomb disposal people, they're such humble people, and it's one of the qualities that I definitely seek out in people. As a general, if someone is humble, they've got nothing left to prove, and these people have absolutely prove, and they just go about their business with minimum of fuss, and they just fade away afterwards. And
I think you should let the general population hear about those kind of things, because they're good, positive things, you know.
Yeah, they're positive when they're positive to a point, but people start wondering then, oh, do we have a major crime issue in Ireland? And we do. The provisional movement would have, I suppose, transitioned into organised crime, even more organised crime afterwards. So the pipe bombs that were being used in Northern Ireland are now being used by drug dealers and mafia outlets and everything, unfortunately. And that's where the bomb disposal people come in, just to keep a lid on it and keep it under control, keep the act as benign as possible.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, I think, Pauline, your magic has worked, because suddenly a load of people have joined us. So perhaps, David, you might take over again, and we'll hand back to Cathal.
Super. Thank you, everyone who just joined us. Just for your information, my name is David. I'm the Irish Surgical Training Group President. And let me just turn this off for a second, and I can see you. That'd be good. Oh, there's loads of people now. That's great. It's all worked. That's great. So just from a trainee perspective, I've been invited to put together a webinar on training, and we put together something around the theme of modern apprenticeships and how to progress in an era that doesn't tolerate mistakes. We have two excellent speakers today. Cathal Berry, who is an ex-Army Ranger, currently TD, and also has done medicine in RCSI. He's going to be talking us from an Army perspective. He has already given some of his talk, and unfortunately a lot of you might have missed it, but I was just drawing parallels between the Army and surgery. And following him, then we have Captain Carl O'Neill, who is head of training in Aer Lingus, and is going to be talking us through the airline perspective. So just because we're now unfortunately a little bit short on time because of the technical issues, I'm going to hand back over to Cathal, and let me just share that presentation for you again, Cathal.
Thanks, Wayne, David, and I'll certainly be as quick as I can. So listen, good evening, everybody. And look, just a quick summary from the last 10 minutes. That's just basically what the Defence Forces do, what militaries do, and there's huge overlap and huge relevance between surgery and military operations. So I suppose the next question is, how do we get our people to that standard that they can really produce the goods in a high stress situation? So David, if you wouldn't mind just flicking on one slide. So the Defence Forces have a training philosophy, and the first mantra they always push out is that knowledge conquers fear. It's such an important thing to say, because fear really is an impediment in relation to good decision making. So you see one of our paratroopers there, and hopefully you can make out most of it, but his backpack is between his legs. You can see his rifle down by the left hand side, and his parachute is hopefully on his back, and he's absolutely connected to absolutely nothing. So he's traveling at 120 miles an hour straight down. You can see Newbridge through the clouds there, actually, because it's over the Curragh Plain. And this is his day jump before he goes and does it as a night jump with night vision goggles. So how do we get people to that standard? I mean, that would put the fear of God into most people. But he's completely relaxed and completely composed. And the reason is that he's on top of his game. He's been brought to that standard where he's completely stable in that position. And unfortunately, if he loses his composure, he's going to start spinning, and he could spin to his death. So the key thing is that knowledge conquers fear. It's all about education and giving our troops basically the level of training that gives them that level of confidence. Before most of the people came on, we spoke about the bomb disposal people. When everyone else is running away from the bomb, our bomb disposal people are slowly walking towards it, and they need to know that they are better than the person who made that bomb. And that's really, really important. That's why they have such high qualifications, that whatever anti-tamper devices or switches are on that device, that the people we send out to defuse and dismantle the bomb are to a superior standard to the people who actually planted it and made it, first of all. So knowledge conquers fear, absolutely essential. Taking on one there as well, David, please. The second piece of the training philosophy is that games are won when no one's watching, and this is robbed unashamedly from the GAA All-Star poster about 20 years ago. I think any sports person on this call will recognize precisely what that statement means, that everyone sees the try that wins the Six Nations in the last minute, or the goal in injury time that wins the county final, but nobody really recognizes all the years of work that's got that sports person to that level, all the devotion, all the suffering, all the sacrifice. So it's really, really important that people are prepared. So the poster on the left is all about education of your people. The poster on the right, it's all about preparation of your people. And that's where checklists come in, being diligent, being conscientious, checking, double checking, and making sure you're at your peak performance. A lot of the sports people out there would say that games are won even before the ball is thrown in. And there's already a predetermined outcome, that your performance on the day does matter, but the team who's prepared more is going to succeed more. So that's all we have from the training philosophy perspective. David, would you mind just flicking on one more slide there, please? So the next thing is that about errors. How do we minimize errors to maximize performance? And first of all, we have to accept that that individual mistakes do occur. And we can pretend it's not the case, or we can actually embrace the fact that we are human and we will definitely make mistakes. But the approach is, how do we minimize those mistakes and how do we mitigate it against it? So minimizing is at an individual level. We train people as best as possible, we educate them and we prepare them. So we minimize the risk of a mistake, but then at an individual level, but then at an organization level, that we're in a position to mitigate against it. And the key point I'm trying to get across here is that we establish systems that catch and compensate for errors. So you will have individual failure, but the key is that you don't have an organizational failure on top of it. So that the teamwork and the organization piece comes in and compensates. So while one member of a surgical team might be making an error, that there's 5 or 6 other people inside in the theatre who can detect the error and can intervene early so that the outcome doesn't change. And that's the key across. So you're familiar with the Swiss cheese model, no doubt. But the third component of the Defence Forces training mantra really is the importance of teamwork and the importance of leadership. And that teamwork piece is essential, that you always have colleagues watching your back, double checking what you're doing, and are prepared to point out if something's going wrong and stopping it from happening. So leadership, we spoke about training, that it's the Defence Forces are obsessed by training, but they're also obsessed by leadership, and they have their own definition of leadership. People use the words management and leadership interchangeably, but realistically they're very, very different things. The military would be of the view that managers organize and that leaders inspire. So I'll just ask Dave just to flick on one more slide there, if I may. So this is the leadership definition of the Defence Force, that leadership is the ability to inspire others in the pursuit of excellence and is best achieved through personal example. And there's 7 C's that we always try to develop in every member of Defence Forces, from the lowest private to the highest general, and they're all, I suppose, 7 different briefs in themselves. But I'm just going to focus in on the one in red there, and it's a thing called composure. And that, as a professional soldier, is the holy grail. This is what we try to make sure every pilot, every sailor, every soldier, that they exude this quality of composure, because it means so much. It means they're on top of their game. It means that they've completely mastered their profession. And this is the key piece as well, that individual composure, whether you're an SPR or an SHO or a Reg or a consultant, that individual composure becomes collective composure. And that is so, so important. So we spoke about the importance of knowledge conquering fear. We spoke about the importance of preparation, that games are won when no one's watching. And the third piece of the jigsaw really is the leadership and the teamwork piece, and the importance of composure. And there's a great phrase that the military use, because there is a perception that the military are always running around shouting orders at each other, which isn't the case at all. If they are shouting, it's because the noise of the battle is so loud and they have to be heard, or there's 100 troops behind them and they want to make sure that everybody hears the instruction. But the military's, I suppose, perspective on leadership is that it's better to be revered than to be feared, which is so important. So if you're in charge, or if you're a senior person in a surgical team, fear will only get you so far, and militarily they teach that fear will certainly only get you so far, because if you're going to war, the fear of the enemy will always be more than the fear of your boss. And that's when people start dropping weapons and running in the opposite direction. So the key point to get across is, you don't want your subordinates, so your teammates, to fear you. You want them to fear leaving you down. And that is absolutely imperative that you as an individual, whether it's as a peer or a superior in rank, that you're held in such high regard that nobody wants to leave you down. And that's when the magic happens. That's when you draw the very, very best out of your people, and that's when the teamwork piece really kicks in, and you prevent, you cover, I won't say cover up, but you mitigate against an individual error by the whole team closing ranks, basically, detecting the error early and intervening accordingly. So we'll just flick on one page there, Dave, please. So it was a great TED talk, actually. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Brian Goleman, he's a Canadian emergency medicine consultant physician. And he basically says, doctors make mistakes. Can we chat about that? It's just a 20-minute talk. Required viewing as far as I'm concerned. If you've seen it, well and good. If you haven't, just go on to TED tonight and read it. It's absolutely, or listen to it. It's an inspirational chat for sure. So dealing with errors, from a student's perspective, militarily, we'd always say, expect mistakes to happen is the first thing. There's no point in a very junior student cutting themselves to ribbons over, a mistake that happens. That mistakes are part of the learning process, whether we like it or not. And every mistake is an opportunity to prove your honesty, prove your humility, and prove your humanity as well. Some of my greatest achievements came about as a result of mistakes, and it's amazing. If you approach it from a proactive perspective, it'll certainly pay dividends in the end. From a tutor's perspective, so if you're coaching somebody and they make an error, I'd always say, if I was trying to correct them, that you focus on the behavior or the action that happened rather than the student themselves, and that you determine that the motive of the student is far more important than the method. So if the motive was honourable, then you cut them a bit more slack, really. And the objective is always should be to prevent recurrence and to improve performance rather than to humiliate or degrade or anything like that. I'm sure we've all, through our medical careers, and certainly through our medical careers, we've seen probably punishments that went a little bit OTT on the humiliating side, dressing down in public in front of nurses or EMTs or porters. That should probably never happen. I heard a great line from a consultant in Lochtonstown once. He always says, praise in public and chastise in private. That's probably a good rule of thumb. So when a mistake happens as well, I think it's very, very important to discern from a sophistication point of view what type of mistake has happened. And the military are very, very keen to point out there's actually 4 types of mistake. And the punishment, in inverted commas, should be proportional to the type of mistake it is. And the first mistake they'd always say is that there's such thing as an honest mistake. Somebody trying something new, a junior member of staff, and they should just be brought in and given a small bit of advice and a few pointers and sent on their way. The second mistake is a busy mistake. And I think we all can appreciate, if you're on the wards or in silent theatre, the busier you are, as in if you get into the danger zone and get becoming too busy, that's when you start making mistakes. So rather than punishing or someone for making a busy mistake, we'd always say they should really be apologized to, and they should be told that, listen, we're going to redistribute some of your workload. We can see that your workload is way out of kilter with everybody else, because the army, like any organization, they ride their best horses. The better you are, the more likely you are to get a job, because if people want a job done, they'll give it to a busy person. There's a concept in the army called 3/4 pace, and it means basically a steady state that if you move at half pace, you're probably going too slow. If you go at full pace, you're going to be sprinting and you're going to cramp up and you're going to fall over. But that 3/4 pace is probably a good place to be. So if you feel like you're going too fast, you should slow down. And if you feel like you're going too slow, you should speed up. So 3/4 pace is a good rule of thumb. The third type of mistake is a lazy mistake. And this is where we're getting into the danger zone, that people didn't do their checks, or people didn't review the notes before theatre. And that does require some disciplinary action for sure. And it's taken far more seriously. And then the last mistake is the most serious of all, is a deliberate mistake. So militarily, it'd be like somebody not showing up for work, or somebody stealing money, or stealing something from the barracks. And that is a much more serious mistake. So I suppose the key point I'm getting across is, while mistakes are made, we should always have a very sophisticated interpretation of what type of mistake has actually happened, and our response should be similar as well, whether it be student or tutor. So we'll just flick on one more slide there, so Dave. And this really is the second last slide, and it's just a quick summary. So we just spoke about three things and how the military tried to minimize mistakes and maximize performance, and how they tried to mitigate from an organizational point of view against the individual mistakes, which are guaranteed to happen because that's what defines our humanity. So the poster on the left, it's all about education. The poster on the middle, it's all about preparation. And the poster on the right is all about inspiration. That the person in charge or your teammates, that they are very, very composed, that they are very, very approachable. And if you are in charge of a surgical team, whether it's an SPR as a consultant, that you have this reassuring presence, and that reassuring presence and that composure from you filters all across the theatre and even broader into the hospital. And when people are at their most composed, they're at their most capable. So that's all I have, really, David. I just want to flick on to the last slide there, and we'll probably take questions at the end if that suits. And thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you very much, Cathal. What I'm going to do is we'll move on to Carl and just have his presentation, and at the end then we might have a bit of a panel discussion, a few questions, and if anyone has any questions, actually it'd be great to put it into the chat section there, and we can have a readout of them towards the end, if that's all right. So just to move on to Captain Carl O'Neill, he's an aviation professional. He's been in the business for over 22 years. He's chief instructor and pilot recruitment manager with Aer Lingus. He's been responsible for many innovative projects within Aer Lingus, including introduction of evidence-based training, competency-based training, and multi-pilot cadet training at Aer Lingus. And he's an all-around nice guy as well, which is nice to boot. So I'm just remind me, Carol, do you want me to share your slides, or would you prefer to do your own?
If you could do it, it'd be fantastic, David. Thank you.
All right, I'll do that for you now.
Yeah, it'll be a bit quick fire at the start, just to flick through those introductory bits, but yeah, it'd be great.
Okay, that should be ready for you there, Carol.
Super. So thank you very much. I'm acutely aware of time, so I will rattle through my presentation. Delighted to be asked to talk to such an esteemed audience. Lots of my friends went through the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and indeed my father was a former dean in there. So I'm delighted to be able to speak to that. And I think there's huge parallels between the two professions. We certainly travelled the world as I did as a child, following my dad around, and there were Irish doctors and pilots in every part of the world, leading the way and innovating and doing all of that. And I suppose in aviation we have two incubators here in Ryanair and Aer Lingus that really do. A lot of talent goes around the world and manages training departments, and even the airlines like Willie Walsh, etc., and Alan Joyce down in Qantas. The next slide, if you wouldn't mind, you can go through. So Carl O'Neill is my name. I'm captain in Aer Lingus and chief instructor, and I fly the A320 fleet, which is it was the short haul fleet, but it's now both, which I'll explain to you in a moment. And I'm in the pilot and training and standards division in flight operations. Next slide, please. My background, I actually did law to start in UCD, and then went on to the Smurfit College to do a master's in business leadership. And you can move on again, and then graduated as a much thinner young man in 1999 in the British Aerospace Flight Training Academy in the south of Spain, where I spent 14 months, torturous months in the sunshine of the south of Spain learning to fly. Moving on then, I have flown a variety of aircraft. The top left is what's called an Avro Warrior BA-146. It's quite an old style, very complex aircraft. Over-engineered, if the truth be told, but very robust. But reliability wasn't actually very good on them. So I did actually see quite a few engine failures and issues like it in real life, which is unusual. Lots of pilots get through their career without seeing anything, but I did get to see these. Moving on to the A320, which is the top one, which would be the kind of one you'd be taking down to the likes of Faro, Malaga, or London, or on a business trip to Germany, etc. And then moving on to the long-haul aircraft, which is the A330, a brief stint on that. And moving on again, I'm now on this brand new state-of-the-art A321neo aircraft, which is just an unbelievable machine. We fly it long haul and short haul. Massive fuel efficiency, power, gadgets, everything. It's just a new car smell as well, which is a really nice thing to have on an aircraft. So we're refleeting with these at the moment. They're fantastic. So that's where I am at the moment. Moving on, I've been able to do great things in the aircraft. This is the Bray Air Show a couple of years ago on a beautiful day, and getting to fly around my neighborhood there, low level and high speed is some fun. And then moving on again, probably the highlight of my career, certainly for my mother and my grandmother, was being involved in flying Pope Francis around when he came down here, transporting him to Knock on a very bad day, in actual fact. But yeah, my granny got great mileage out of that one, as you can imagine, at the hairdressers and whatnot. So that's basically me. If we can move on again, David. The parallels here, moving on again. Sorry about this click on. You know, every day, people think every day must be the same in these roles. However, as you know, they are in a large way, but things happen to make them very, very different as well. And we describe it as, you know, hours and hours of absolute boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror when you get a jump or a start, and how you deal with that is important. Moving on, please. And what the safest thing we could do with our aircraft and our pilots is to dress them up like that and put them in the hangar and close the door. It really would be the safest thing to do, but we're in risk management, because that's not what you can do with a $250 million asset. So we have to apply risk management techniques, and obviously human factors is a huge part of that. So pilot training is really, it needs to be the gold standard. I'm very proud of it, what we do in Aer Lingus, and that we are innovators and we are at the leading edge of pilot training. So leaving it in the hangar isn't an option. So what do we actually do with them? So if you just want to roll on there, David, what we do is we actually take these aircraft weighing 240 tons with 300 passengers on board them, and we take them up to basically 10-12 kilometers up in the sky, and we fly them around at 480 knots with the outside air temperature at -62, buffeted by winds of 200 knots in thunderstorms, ice, turbulence, volcanic ash, you name it. And we take them over oceans and cities and hostile terrain. In particular, last year, you might recall, around about this time last year, we were over and back to China picking up PPE as part of the initial COVID plan, and that was turned around overnight. And no Aer Lingus aircraft had ever been over in that part of the world. So being able to turn that risk assessment basically through the night and get airborne was quite a feat. These aircraft carry about 85 tons of fuel, which is an awful lot. And we sit you beside an engine there about 10 to 12 feet away from that engine, which has a core temperature of 900 degrees Celsius. Each blade is 1.2 meters long, weighing about 25 kilos, and they spin at 11,000 times a minute. You could argue that's probably not the safest place to be. But I think what we do is, through training and through all of our systems and our checks and balances, we make this an incredibly safe place. And next slide, please. In actual fact, I am 19 times more likely to die on the way to work than I am at 30 West, crossing the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of the night. And that is testament to everything we do, including our training. You can move on again, David, thank you. So the apprenticeship that we look at, again, you can move on. We take people from cadets who are basically, we call it the Zero to Hero program, which basically takes people in with zero experience into a cadetship and moves them through all of those phases of being a second officer onto a first officer, captain, and then ultimately the ultimate role is to be a base trainer or a senior examiner in an airline. It's kind of the pinnacle of a pilot's career. In each of those phases, there is significant training and checking. So to jump from one to the other, you have to meet certain standards. And in this part of the world, and particularly in an airline like Aer Lingus, those steps are difficult, and you're expected to show up and produce very good performance to move through those, because it's part of our safety management system. You can move on again there, please, David. So I'm not going to go into all of these bits, but when we start out training people in flight schools, and even when we bring them back to the airline at first, we do significant ground school. You can see we do 900 hours there. And what we do is we use competency units. So this particular competency I'm looking at here is a takeoff. And you can see on day one, what we will do to the student is we'll let them take off with no wind, no challenges whatsoever. You take the aircraft off into the sky. However, moving through, we're getting more. Now we might have a crosswind. Now we might have some wind shear and a crosswind. Now the engine's going to fail at takeoff in a crosswind. And finally, we're going to do a takeoff towards a mountain where we got to do an emergency turn, and the engine is going to fail in that crosswind. So whilst the skill of taking off is the same, the event is getting harder all the time. But our expectation is that the person is getting to deal with it in a more successful fashion. And we train all the way up to until we're happy that they can do the complex thing to a high standard. And we track that throughout their training, and we intervene whenever any more training is needed. Okay, so that's just the initial bit to get you actually up and onto the aircraft like an Airbus A320 or something like that. You can move on, David, please. So this is probably different. All pilots, and that is from the chief pilot to the chief instructors to every single person, the most experienced. If they've been there 45 years, every single pilot goes through a recurrent training package. So we have to do a line check, which is actually an event on the aircraft with passengers, and someone sits in the middle seat and watches us and scores us. We then have a day of technical school every year. We have a day of emergency procedures, which is putting out fires and jumping in swimming pools and life jackets and all things like that. And then the key things are, and where we really use the evidence-based system, is in the simulators. And I'm aware of a fantastic simulator set up in the College of Surgeons now. And how we do this has been revolutionized over the last couple of years. And it's one of the projects we're very proud of. Day one is an evaluation, and the students have no idea. It used to be a contrived process that they'd come in and do a check, and it was the same thing. And now they've no idea what the process is. So they just arrive up and we give them a flight plan, and they're in Zurich and they need to get to Cork. And we create events and scenarios, and we grade them on that. And based on those grades and those competencies that we see that require an uplift, we train them the next day in those specific competencies, because it's about getting better all the time. So you can move on to the next slide, please, David. Similarly, all the way through for the co-pilots, we have a command development program. So I guess this is moving them through that process of being the number 2 in the cockpit to being the number 1 in the cockpit. So we use simulators, we use real line flights. There's lots of stages of training, and they ultimately end up in jumping through hoops. And one of the key fundamentals here is that we're teaching them to use all the available resources that are there as captains. The most valuable resource we have as captains is actually the person sitting beside us, because they are qualified almost to the same level as we have, as we are. We hear things like captains saying, listen, I'll tell you what we do, thinking that's using the resource. The way to use that resource is actually to say, what do you think we should do? It might be rubbish that comes back, but at least you now have a second opinion. It's very seldom rubbish. It's usually a considered opinion that you possibly have to give some thought to. It may not be the decision you go with, but at least it's another source of information. And the facts are, the captain is always the captain. If it comes down to the decision, the captain overrules everybody. So that is in the background all the time, irrespective of the training interface that goes on. You can move on, David, please. Throughout our command process, about even 5 years ago, what we did was we checked everyone to death. Basically, check until they fail. And we've had to have a complete sea change in the way we do this. And now we train. So we've actually flipped from 90% checking and 10% training to the complete opposite. Because what is the value of checking until the very end when you need to? So lots of really bespoke training, and it's evidence-based on the person, which goes through. The results we have seen have been phenomenal. Our command candidates are undoubtedly finding it easier, and we're getting a better product. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You can move on again, please. Yeah, this is an interesting one. We found in a lot of research that we do that, you know, these are adults we're dealing with. Some of them are quite young, some might be 20 years old or whatever, but a lot of the people we're training are somewhere between 20 and 40 years old. You know, adults want to learn, and they have experience that we need to draw on. And they have knowledge as well. It's not like they don't know anything. So we try and suck that out of them. And they want mentorship. They want to be brought through the process and shown the better way to get through, as opposed to being kind of slapped all the time. And don't forget, as a trainee, you're probably fighting imposter syndrome all the time yourself. you're there going, oh my God, I shouldn't really be here. I will never forget the training captain on my very first flight asking me to look out the cockpit door, and I saw 200 passengers, and you know, it's a scary day, no more than I'm sure the first day in surgery is for anyone as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so understanding the trainee is really important for us, and it actually, the onus is on our instructors to amend their training for the trainee. And we discussed this interface with, I spent the whole day with instructors today discussing this interface and how we manage it. And what we actually do is we actually do psychological assessments on and psychometric testing on candidates as they join the airline, and we find out where they loosely fit into what their preferred learning style. Some people are pragmatists, that's me. I just want bullet points, not interested in reading all around it and why and what temperatures and whatever else. That'd be the theorists. The reflectors like to sit back and think about things, and the activists are just the people, let me into the airplane and I'll go and fly it. How people learn tends to be how they teach as well. So as I said, I like the bullet points, so I like to teach in a bullet point fashion. So when I find out that I'm teaching a theorist, I actually have to go and find out more information, because I know this person is going to need to, you know, they need more information from me. So I don't like seeing theorists on my roster, but that's the way it is. And we ask the mentor to be flexible to the needs of the trainee, because it'll have a better output in training. So you can move on there. Very quickly, you could talk about this all day. There are kind of 4 techniques that exist in this, being the hard man, the balanced approach, and ineffective, and Mr. Nice Guy. And they all relate to how task orientated you are versus how people concern. You're concerned for people. So for example, the hard man just wants to get the job done and really doesn't give a damn about the person that they're training. One click, please. And what they will tend to use is a tell technique, which is just, this is the way it has to be, end of story. That's it, right? I'm telling you that's the way we do it, end of story. Whereas probably trainees will get a lot more out of the sell. Let me explain to you why we do this. Now, obviously, time is of the essence. And when we get close to the ground, or when things start to get a little bit critical, we clearly move back to the tell. We really, really do. And we push back to sell whenever we can. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is that you need to be very flexible as a trainer, and be able to operate in all of these things. The ineffective one is actually interesting. People always going to go, well, how could that be a style? That's when you actually withdraw and you sit back and you watch and almost test the people. Okay, the next slide, if you don't mind. Yeah, it's very important at the start of all of these trainings that we essentially have a contract, you know, a handshake, and we say, we will hold a big party and we will give you trainers and ground school and simulators and, you know, a mentor and all this sort of stuff. But the onus is on the trainee to show up and get their work done and understand that they are absolutely the other side of this relationship that needs to work. So it's not a case of just showing up and teach me everything. You have to work on the background, at the backside of that there. One key change as well we've had over the last maybe 10 years is that the cockpit we used to try and keep to be a very quiet place and only use SOP and only certain phrases and things like that. However, now what we're trying to do is get inside people's heads. So we're, you know, when you're doing something, we're asking them to verbalize their intentions. You know, get it out there. Tell me what you're doing so I understand. Oh, you're descending very quickly because we want to get underneath this rain shower. You're turning right. You're climbing slowly because you want to do this. So that I'm not sitting there kind of wondering, I wonder what's going on there, because we don't have a shared mental model in that place. And these 4 words are so key in this training and apprenticeship thing, I think. One is fairness. It's got to be fair and mature. As I said, this is adult learning and it needs to be treated like that. Respect should be in everything in life. And honesty. I think at the start, if you have an agreement with someone that this is going to be a very honest relationship, as my old boss used to say, getting caught telling the truth is one of the best things that can happen to you. But, you know, having that understanding that this is serious and we're going to work through this together, but we have to be frank and honest with each other. It's very important. Okay, acutely aware of time, so let me go through. We'll actually skip that slide and the next one, if you don't mind, and the next one. Yeah, and get into this. So we have our tagline, which is building resilience, and Cathal alluded to this sort of thing earlier on about how important this is, and we describe it as through excellence in training. So moving on there, Thank you. So we use these new competency-based tools. This is a great discussion, and we could actually spend the whole night talking about this. The difference between experience, expertise, and competency. I mean, it's just a myriad. I saw a wonderful talk given by Emirates many, many years ago about this. If you sit there in the cold light of day, is the very, very best person the most experienced? Possibly not. Possibly. It's not, probably not the least experienced either. So this whole matrix of what we're looking for is basically a competent expert with some experience. And that's what we want to move to, because expertise doesn't necessarily come from experience. It greatly assists it, but there can be experts without massive experience as well. You can move on again, please. Here we go. Excellence, right? And as I said, we certainly would view ourselves as being at the coal face of all of this, and particularly with innovation, training, and whatever else. But it's not about believing that you're the best. It's about continually striving to get better. If we just believe we're the best, it's not good enough. Every single aircraft that has an incident or an accident has 2 fully compliant pilots and 2 fully regulated. The aircraft is fully regulated, maintained, etc. And yet it wasn't enough in an incident or an accident. So we've got to push. We've got to keep going and getting better and better. And we need to ask ourselves, do we change? Are we open to change? Because it's probably what may be needed. And even if you don't change, you should certainly consider it in these things. Moving on, please. Nearly there. So these are the competencies that we created for operating an aircraft. And the thing I like about this is this was done globally, and there was about 500, something like that, workshops put together, and pilots got into a room and said, tell me everything about the best pilot you flew with. And it was amazing. From Japan to South America, all over the world, they basically came up with the same ideals. And that is how we came up with the competencies that are required to be a pilot, and not only that, to be a good one. So I won't go through them all. The 2 bits, number 3 and 4 there, the aircraft flight path management, that's basically flying the aircraft with and without the autopilot. And for us, that has to be a given, because that's the safe harbor when things go wrong. So we are uber confident that our pilots can actually fly the aircraft. And that sounds like a very strange thing, but there have been numerous high-profile events over the last even 10 years, one possibly being this tragic Air France 447, which unfortunately, as you know, several doctors were lost on. That there are doubts as to whether the aircraft were the pilots actually able to fly the aircraft manually. And there are umpteen examples of this. So we have to have that as a given, because that is where that is just the absolute bottom minimum standard. But what we really work on with our cadets, moving all the way through up to the very senior people, is leadership, problem solving, situation awareness, and workload management. We put knowledge in the middle there. That was one that Aer Lingus decided to put in, which was good. But I think we're moving hopefully away from it now, and we're going to change it to professional discipline. Because what I mean by professional discipline is actually coming to work well prepared, with your shiny shoes and your tie on, even to that extent, that this job is a profession and you need to treat it that way. Okay, can we just move on, please? So in our interfaces, we have lots of interfaces in the cockpit. We have 2-man at the top left. There's actually 4 people in that cockpit, and managing that whole event with not just 2 people, 3 people, and 4 people. And in fact, going to China last year, we took 5 people. Has different there's different dynamics and matrices, and how we manage all of that, we needed procedures and training for. So it's very interesting. And obviously, we also have part of a crew in the cabin, which need to be obviously both managed, and the communication strategies between the cockpit and the cabin have come a long way, and really I think it's in a good place at the moment. And nearly there. If we move on, 2 more slides, or just 1 slide, I think. So this is really interesting, and this is hot off the press. I've just explained to you all the competencies that we expect our pilots to have, and we grade them and score them at every occasion and retrain them and whatever else. But now the other side of the interface is being looked at, and we are now grading our instructors on their competencies. And this is them. This is managing that learning environment, instructing how you interact with the trainee, and more importantly, the assessment and the evaluation we make. And we need to make sure that our assessors are doing that really well, and the inter-rater reliability between them all is very, very tight to make sure we can drive the higher standards that we need. Next slide, please. This is just some of the behaviors that we have. This is just for assessment. And really interestingly as well, I think this has been very good. The ones in red at the bottom there is we expect our trainers to feed back into the training system to say, this isn't happening. Because once we collate all that information, maybe it's a systems problem as opposed to that pilot's problem. And maybe our training isn't working in that regard. So that's been a really good piece as well. Again, if you can move on, please, David. So finally, we have a set of competencies for both our pilots to help them through that roadmap from cadet all the way to the top. The interface is really important. And what we're doing now is we're training on both sides of that interface. So we're training the pilots how to be better pilots, and we're training our instructors and examiners how to be better instructors and examiners to make sure that that interface doesn't rub and that we get a better product at the end of it. Thank you. I think that's my last slide. Yes, thank you.
Super. Great, thank you very much. That was brilliant. So just before we start the panel discussion, I wanted to quickly ask any administrators there, is there a time limit on this call, or
David, we generally don't go past 7:15.
Okay, perfect. I have a couple of questions coming in from the group through the chat. I might put the first one to Cathal, if you don't mind. Cathal, you mentioned 7 C's of a leader in your presentation, and I thought it was really interesting to be able to break it down like that and have those 7 kind of competencies of a leader. Was brilliant. 2 that really stuck out to me were character and charisma, and I'm just wondering, can these be taught? And one of the questions from the group, I suppose, was, can everyone be taught? And so is there a way of teaching those particular ones, and can everyone be taught those competencies to become a leader or to become a good soldier?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, David, and for the person who posed it as well. I guess it's very hard to teach these things, and a lot of we agree militarily that the apprenticeship model is excellent. It really has been around for centuries, but this concept of a role model or a mentor, a lot of things you don't actually learn in a lecture room. You learn by observing your peers or the people who've gone before. And if you are interacting with an inspirational character, you will say that I want to be like this person. I mean, I remember getting lectures in medical school. You get Hilary Humphreys to give you a lecture, and everybody wants to be a microbiologist as a result, because you're so inspired by his enthusiasm, his passion for the subject, So to answer your question, I think, yes, it can be developed. Some people have it better than others. So, for instance, Ronan O'Gara is excellent at drop goals, for instance. So he is in his comfort zone there. And I would be petrified if I was asked to take a kick in front of 50,000 people in a rugby field. But I would be able to parachute, no problem, from 20,000 feet with oxygen, and Ronan O'Gara might be under a bit of pressure, So some people have different talents, and it can be developed, absolutely. But the use of the apprenticeship model is really important. Use of role models and mentors, and you get very, very good example. In relation to charisma, that's just people's personal magnetism, and you can develop that aura of authority, absolutely, and it's based primarily on humility, but character is really important. People want to work for good people, and if they're working for people who have dodgy ethics and issues in relation to the law and observing the law, or just poor what's the word, poor judgment, poor character, just people you don't I suppose you can't identify with, then the standard of performance goes down as well. So the 7 C's, we just say, look, did you sail the 7 C's? Yes, we did indeed. There they are, and they've served me well in the past. I don't always reach them in any shape or form, but there's no sure way of not achieving your goals than not having them in the first place. There is an 8 C, and I'll finish on this one, that if you acquire all those 7, so courage being the most important, because if you're not brave, you're never going to achieve anything. Composure is the end state, really, because that's when you've mastered your profession. But the 8th C really is credibility, and it goes back to what you're saying. If you have credibility, people will literally run through walls for you if you want to, because they will do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to not leave you down. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cathal. Carol, I might ask you a quick question if you don't mind. There was an interesting part of your talk, I thought, about the learning style. You mentioned theorist and activist, and I'm wondering, is that something that can be assessed? Is that something that you were talking about working it into your teaching then? Is that something that is taught or can be taught, how to teach someone after they're assessed with that learning style? I thought it was just fascinating, because people will obviously respond better to being taught in a way that they like.
Yeah, so with the new with people that join the airline, they go through a huge battery of psychometric testing, whatever else, and we do see what they are. And in fact, the people who run these tests for us would actually say to us, what it'll really show you is what they're not. And we try and pair, like they would always try and pair me maybe with a pragmatist, because we'll just get on like a house on fire and it'll be effortless for me. You know, that light will go amber. We just kind of look at it, and then when it goes red, we turn it off. Like, that's the way I deal with things. Whereas the theorists are people like, what pressure now will that go amber at? And you know, that is irrelevant actually to the task and the outcome. But I suppose what is important for us to do is, when people become instructors throughout their instructor training, we test them as well, and they find out what way they like to learn. And it seems to be the case that the way you like to learn is the way you like to teach. And we have to say to them, look, you have to be conscious that you're actually a pragmatist, and this person you're going to be with here is a theorist, so they're going to need some more help, or the other way around, you're going to need to speed things up, right? You're going to bore them, so move on.
Because I'm definitely a theorist, Carol, yeah. And I just I love knowing why. Why does that do that? And you know,
you are my nightmare, David.
No problem. I won't apply to Aer Lingus, so Carl. Sorry, Prof. O'Connell, you had your hand up there to come in.
Thank you, David, and thank you to both for really inspirational talks. I think both Aer Lingus and the Defence Forces, there is a pride in the uniform. There's a pride in the body corporate. But the health service is always under the cudgel from the criticisms about service delivery and outpatient overruns, etc., etc. Do you think that pride in the uniform, pride in the body corporate is core to what you then expect from your trainees?
Yeah, well, I'll take that first of all. Yeah, Cork Airport's an interesting one, because the terminal is mirrored, and inside an airplane they all feel the same. And when you come around the corner, and the same in JFK actually, when you come around the corner and you see the shamrock on the tail and whatever else, you do get a bit of a kind of that's fantastic. And you're right, people who do work for that brand, it's a global brand and it's associated with a lot of things. You know, it's associated with professionalism and warmth and Irish hospitality and all of these things. And we all kind of, you know, as you said, we glow when we talk about it. And I think that's really important, because we usually get enough, like for pilots, we had 8,000 applications last year, and we were able to take, 2019, we took 40 people. So we always say to people, you know, you need to sell yourself to us that you can believe in this, that you believe in this brand, because quite frankly, out of that 8,000, probably 500 of them are employable. But do they have the belief and what it takes to be one of us and to join that team? So I think that's and actually Cathal will probably say the same, but I fly with a lot of people who have military backgrounds, and they talk the exact same way about the military. It is all in a hair, and like it's in them. Sorry, Cathal.
No, I'd agree entirely, Carol. So to answer your question, Prof, yeah, look, uniform is really important. It's your jersey, basically. So militarily, your camouflage uniform is your jersey. It's your everything. It makes you bigger, makes you better. There's a tricolour on your left shoulder, and people recognise, particularly in this, this decade of commemorations, that we didn't always have an army of our own. And we weren't always ruled from Dublin either. We have to bear that in mind. So look, it's very, very important. Uniform is essential. To be fair to the health service, though, I think particularly over the last 15 months, your uniform really are the scrubs. And I think the public can certainly identify with that now, and it certainly resonates with the public out there. You wear a mask, you wear blue scrubs or whatever colour you choose, and you should have pride in that. To me, it's a uniform. And it's even more than a uniform because it represents that you're prepared to accept risk on behalf of the public. So I think you're certainly on the way. And I think you should capture that, and every opportunity you should be putting out those images because they're very, very they're very evocative. And you should certainly see that.
It's me. This is why.
Brilliant. Prof, you're not muted there. I might mute you if you don't mind. Couple of other questions had come in. Cathal, I might address the next one to you. There was a question from Dr. Doherty, who would be quite involved in human factors and simulation within RCSI. And she asked the question about simulation in the Army. Not necessarily, I suppose, you do training exercises, but are there any more artificial scenarios that you can create, perhaps that don't use live rounds, that you can bring out in your training of cadets?
Yeah, great question. No, absolutely. We've certainly embraced virtual reality training and simulator training as well. So before you go to the range, you can bring your rifle to the laser range. It's an indoor range, basically. And there's a big cinema screen in front of you, and you can be presented with, we would say, shoot, no shoot scenarios. So you're presented with a situation where you decide whether it's appropriate for you to shoot. And if it is appropriate to shoot, where in the person's body is it appropriate? So there should never be a question, and I know Carol mentioned as well, over someone's technical competence to fly a plane or to fire a rifle. The only question shouldn't be, can you shoot or can you not shoot? It is, should you shoot on the doors? That's a particular scenario. So to answer your question, there's a lot of scenario training going on for sure. And once the indoor range training is complete, then they move on to the live range. And unfortunately, you can't simulate the stress of being exposed to elements, being tired, carrying a house of a backpack on your back, being absolutely exhausted, and you can't simulate the recoil of a weapon, and you cannot substitute for, if you squeeze around a live round through the barrel of your weapon, that you may kill somebody if it hits. So it really, really focuses your mind, and that's why live fire is so important, and you can't substitute for that, unfortunately. You can build towards it, but you can't substitute.
Well, thank you very much, Cathal. And one last question for Carl. I had, does a co-pilot ever spend time in the cockpit without the captain before becoming a captain?
So I think the answer to that question is no, other than for physiological reasons when the captain has to use the bathroom or whatever. But in actual fact, that whole process has changed as well recently. You might recall the Germanwings incident in the Alps. So now nobody is allowed in the cockpit on their own. So what actually happens there now is the cabin crew will secure the front galley and make sure there's no passengers in toilets and whatever else. And then the cockpit door is opened and the cabin crew member comes in and sits with the, in case you're talking about the co-pilot, and the captain goes out to the toilet, or vice versa. But there is never anyone left in the cockpit alone anymore. And that's actually now European law, that there has to be, irrespective that one is not a pilot. It's purely to ensure that the cockpit can be accessed at all times.
But I suppose it was. I think the question might have been: would a co-pilot ever fly with another co-pilot before they graduate up?
Misunderstood that. No, but what we do is we do leg about leg. So, for example, I might fly it down to Munich this morning, and the co-pilot will fly it back. And by flying it, I mean actually operating the controls of the aircraft and manipulating the autopilot and whatever. And the other pilot, in this case me, will be talking to air traffic control and getting weather and all those bits and pieces. And then we'll do the exact opposite on the way home. And that's how we do the developmental piece, because the job then just becomes changing seats, moving from the right seat to the left seat. And the role is kind of the same.
Okay, thank you very much, Cathal and Carol. It's been a real pleasure. And I also want to thank Professor David Healy, who actually gave me the idea for bringing you all together and talking on this subject. Prof. O'Connell, did you want to come in there?
Well, just on behalf of the college, to thank you, David, and the trainees for putting together such an interesting evening. And I'm sure I have a list of questions that could have kept us going for another hour, but I think we've had a very, very good discourse. Thanks to Carl and to Cathal. I have no doubt that you will be asked back at another stage to give us an update on how to train our mentors and how to deal with less than full-time training and how to deal with the failing trainee. These are all questions that we have to deal with in the surgical profession as well. So thank you to all, and David, you can sign off.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone, and thank you all for attending. I'm actually signing off for the year now. This is my final event, and I'll be handing over to a new president at our next AGM. So it was a real pleasure to be the president for the year, and thank you all for attending. Good evening.
Thank you.